Welcome back. Welcome to the event attendees here in the room. Welcome to those that are joining us online on ESA Web TV, on our WebEx event dedicated platform. Our program now continues with a very special keynote by Alexander MacDonald. Alexander is a NASA chief economist. He is the author and editor of a number of NASA reports, including Emerging Space, the Evolving Landscape of 21st Century American Spaceflight, Public-Private Partnerships for Space Capability Development, and Economic Development of Low Earth Orbit. He is also a former executive staff specialist on commercial space at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Alexander, I think we're about to get a reality check from across the pond, so the floor is absolutely yours.
Well, thank you very much. It is a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank Giuseppe and the whole team at ESA for the kind invitation to come here and give today's keynote. As some of you may be aware, I recently announced my retirement from NASA before the election, I will add. And so this is scheduled to be my last international talk in my role as NASA's first chief economist. And for me, it is rather appropriate that it's here, as I believe that the application of Earth observation systems to climate challenges is one of our most important issues and opportunities for our international space community going forward. So as not to bury the lead, as we say, I want to be clear about my main message up front, which is that in the US, the way that we have achieved our most significant commercialization advancements is perhaps paradoxically not to focus too much on the commercialization part, but rather to focus on building important, ambitious programs that have public support, and then by utilizing commercial approaches as the primary way to achieve them. And so with that in mind, I would like to tell you a story about one of my long-term projects at NASA related to Earth observation. I've never told this story publicly before, and it may not at first seem all that related to the topic of Earth observation commercialization, but I hope by the end you'll see the connection. And it begins, like many great American stories, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. As a Canadian who grew up and was educated in Europe, in Belgium and England, I joined NASA working as a foreign national contractor at the NASA Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley in January 2008. And in July of that year, the Republican governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, visited NASA Ames and was hosted by my boss, Brigadier General Dr. Pete Worden, there on the right, who some of you may know. Governor Schwarzenegger was shown the NASA Ames Hyperwall there in front of him. The Hyperwall was connected to the NASA Ames supercomputer Pleiades, which was one of the fastest in the US government at the time. Hyperwall showed the results of the computer simulations of the Earth's climate and ocean circulation at a truly incredible resolution. And Governor Schwarzenegger declared himself deeply impressed. And as someone who grew up very much looking up to the governor, as someone who could defend the Earth against aliens and against Terminators, when he declares himself impressed, you take notice. I remember the importance that this visit had on me, as it seemed clear that satellite Earth observations and the associated visualization tools were a powerful new capability in the socio-political battle to manage and prepare for climate change. If even a non-interactive model visualization of this type could impress and engage a governor like Schwarzenegger, I couldn't help but wonder what else might future generations of hyperwalls contribute. And I remember talking with Will Marshall at the time, who was a friend and another foreign national contractor colleague at NASA Ames at the time, and of course would later go on to co-found the Earth observation company Planet. And we both imagined a future where real-time, daily Earth observation satellite imagery and powerful data visualization systems like the Hyperwall would combine into a powerful new tool, something that we somewhat youthfully and optimistically called a Mission Control Center for Spaceship Earth. We discussed the ambitious idea for a while, but it became clear that we didn't quite have the technology or the data sets yet, and frankly, the political will to tackle the even more difficult socio-economic challenges, and we eventually each continued on with other projects. Will, of course, would go on to co-found Planet with other colleagues at names at the time, Robbie Schingler and Chris Boschhausen, and I stayed at NASA working on commercial space economic analyses of various sorts. But I never forgot the vision and the potential of a Mission Control Center for Spaceship Earth. And so when I participated in a National Science Foundation workshop on the future of the convergence of nano-bio-info-cognitive technologies, I wrote up the idea that we had envisioned. You can see the basic idea here, and it is as follows. If we are all passengers on Spaceship Earth, as Buckminster Fuller memorably put it, then we should consider the potential need for some sort of Spaceship Earth Mission Control Center, a scientific facility that could serve as a focal point for the coordinated collection and display of global-scale Earth science and socio-economic information, and for the political assessment of our options for ensuring the long-term well-being of our families, communities, cities, states, and countries. At the same time as the workshop, the Obama White House had asked NASA to identify a new grand challenge. And so I put forward the concept. I advocated to my NASA colleagues that a true grand challenge would be to develop a Mission Control Center for Spaceship Earth. Though I did my best to make the case for such a facility, I remember the NASA science and engineering earth science leaders explicitly arguing against embracing such a grand challenge, citing instead the need for more money for new instruments and new missions. Ultimately, the grand challenge that was chosen was related to asteroid defense, and so I let the idea lie. In fact, I let the idea lie for almost a decade, until another White House political opportunity arose. After serving through the first Trump administration on the 9th floor of NASA headquarters, focused primarily on establishing Artemis and our Moon to Mars strategy, near the start of the Biden administration, I was asked to represent NASA on an interagency working group with NOAA, FEMA, and the US Census, which was part of a White House initiative created by executive order of President Biden on day one of his administration in order to advance racial equity and support for underserved communities. Our subcommittee was focused on equitable data access related to climate and natural disaster information, and we were asked a question by Ambassador Susan Rice, then the chair of the US Domestic Policy Council, which put into stark relief the data challenges related to climate change and national governance. She asked us, the 4 different agencies, if we could tell her who demographically we expected to be impacted by coastal flooding in the Gulf Coast in the 2040s. Because while there are external academics and research groups that could come up with an answer to that question, the US federal government, as a function of its own capabilities, had not, and to my knowledge still has not, integrated the demographic socioeconomic data with the GIS elevation models and particular identified likely scenario projections of flooding in order to do so. This request from the head of the US Domestic Policy Council suggested to me that there was indeed a need for a facility where you could take a senior political official and show them the complex modeling and projections and be able to meaningfully discuss difficult conclusions and options forward. Although I had let my advocacy for the concept within NASA lie, I had continued to develop the concept externally, including through the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Space, which I am fortunate to be a part of. And I had spearheaded their report on Space for Net Zero, which highlighted an Earth Operations Center, a data visualization and integration facility focused on achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions through satellite-based emissions monitoring and verification, based on some of the commercial and nonprofit missions for methane monitoring then emerging, like Carbon Mapper, Methane Sat, and GHG Sat. And in an effort to visualize what an Earth Operations Center could actually look like, I worked with students at the Arizona State University and MIT to develop a 3D virtual immersive simulation of such a facility, a still image of which you can see here. And for what it's worth, turns out that this student project was probably more important than the World Economic Forum report, as I'll explain in a moment. As part of the Equitable Data Working Group, my colleague from FEMA one day asked me if NASA would be willing to partner with FEMA to co-host their annual Resilient Nation Partnership Network event, which highlighted community-level disaster preparedness efforts across the country. I managed to get NASA to agree to co-host the event, and we ended up with a willingness on the part of NASA Administrator Bill Nelson to make some opening remarks. As part of preparing him for his remarks, I told him the story of the Interagency Working Group and the request from Susan Rice and the Domestic Policy Council, and then showed him the visualization of the facility that had been prepared by the ASU and MIT students. After the short 15-minute presentation, he simply paused on this visualization and said, "We need to build one of those." And I said, "Yes, sir, we do." And so on the day of the event, as I listened in, I was excited and gratified to hear Administrator Nelson say that in order to prepare for our climate future, NASA would help to develop a climate change mission control. And I was particularly delighted when afterwards his public NASA blog used that exact phrase as well. Specifically, he announced that we were exploring a new concept at NASA, a Climate Resilience Design Center, which could help support state, local, tribal, and territorial governments with Earth observation data and visualizations as they develop their own climate resilience strategies. He noted that this was not something that NASA could do alone, that it would need partnership with other agencies like FEMA and data from commercial companies and international partners. And he closed with some of that flourish that made him such a successful US Senator for 18 years, as he noted that our decisions will determine the fate of Earth. Let us protect it. Let us act boldly and with urgency. Let us preserve it for this generation and generations that follow. That was a good day. And after a number of years of personally feeling that we were behind in our support for climate-related efforts at NASA, in that moment I felt we might just be on the cusp of making a transformative change for the better. Now, anybody who knows anything about the political landscape at NASA, however, knows that sometimes a decision by an agency leader is only the beginning of the conversation. And that was indeed somewhat sadly the case here. To be clear, with an announcement from the NASA administrator tied to a day one executive order from the White House, we were definitely going to have to do something. But the careful political readers amongst you may have already noted the internally negotiated language, which stated that we are exploring a new concept. As the weeks and months after the announcement progressed, it soon became clear that that language was no accident, and a number of NASA officials, political and career, internally began to express doubts about the new initiative, worrying it might move NASA too close into policy territory, and that either way, we need to stick to our main objectives of, that's right, building new instruments and new missions. And so by the time the White House released their report on the Equitable Data Working Group, the initiative had, I believe the term is pivoted, still proceeding, but with a budget much lower than the original ambition, and a shift away from a meaningful climate change mission control facility and towards a still important but more limited scope. Nonetheless, real dollars, single-digit millions of dollars, were allocated, and teams at JPL and NASA Goddard began working on the new Earth Information Center. In June of last year, 2023, Administrator Nelson hosted an interagency ribbon cutting with representatives from FEMA, NOAA, USDA, USAID, USGS, and the EPA to inaugurate the new physical Earth Information Center in the lobby of NASA headquarters. And while this first physical Earth Information Center at NASA headquarters has a special place in my heart as the first, a newer version, even closer to the original vision, has just last month opened in partnership with the Smithsonian at the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. There on the second floor is a room where people can sit and be absorbed in the massive data related to Earth science that NASA collects. publicly reports out on our measurements of CO2 and methane. And while it is, of course, isn't a research and operations facility as originally envisioned, I believe it does show the power of physical Earth observation displays and of the potential for hyperwall-style visualizations to engage, inform, and potentially even change the minds of members of the public as well as political leaders. The Earth Information Center, or the EIC as we call it, is updated daily with the latest information from our satellites, and it includes a number of provocative visualizations related to global temperatures, natural disasters, greenhouse gas emissions, sea level rise, ice sheet loss, and many others. It is a physical embodiment of what being a public science agency in the US national capital can mean. The Earth Information Center will continue to evolve, with the best opportunities to do so in the future, I suspect, being in the online version at the new interagency online home of the Earth Information Center and the US Greenhouse Gas Center, hosted at the long dreamed of and now, thanks to the EIC, finally realized website domain of earth.gov. I do hold out hope that one day in the future, it may yet evolve into the type of research and decision support facility that we had originally envisioned back at NASA Ames. But I'd be lying if I said that I thought the prospect is particularly high for this concept being advanced significantly inside the US government over the next few years. Which is what brings me here to telling you this story today. The reason I tell you this is not just because I'm feeling a bit nostalgic and frankly worried about the future of projects at NASA like the Earth Information Center. The reason I'm telling you this is because what amazes me about America as a partly European-raised Canadian is the ability for visions like this to take root and be embraced in America. And for me, it is that embrace of ambitious visions that is the true secret to American success in the commercialization of space. The original vision for the Earth Information Center was costed in the hundreds of millions to outfit a facility that would be able to do the job of visualizing Earth information data in a way that could support actual political decisions. And that was going to take tens of millions of dollars at an annual level to operate it. And for a while at least, that scale of ambition was embraced. And it is that embrace of ambition that I think we all need to most rapidly learn from organizations like NASA and the US approach to space activities. The secret to NASA's commercialization success isn't, to my mind, the mechanisms or particular program support approaches. I've seen excellent presentations from the ESA teams, such as Geraldine's team, on commercialization, and they are, if anything, more detailed, more thoughtful than what NASA puts together for equivalent efforts. But what is different, what is maybe missing sometimes, I fear, in Europe, is the bold, multi-billion-dollar public missions which exist because they have the popular support and which commercialization approaches are then used as the primary means to achieve. NASA drives commercialization by establishing major world-leading goals, developing public support for them, and turning to industry to execute on them. If you ask how NASA helps contribute to achievements like Starship, that is how. We have declared that NASA will return its astronauts and our international partner astronauts to the moon, and that we will do it using commercial capabilities. Indeed, I've spent significantly more of my time over my career at NASA helping to build our strategy for Artemis, and yet NASA is still a place with enough opportunity for ambition that it can make use of some of the extra energy left over for an Earth Information Center. That embrace of ambition, not any program mechanism or another, is how NASA has helped the US commercial space industry rise to lead the world in the last decade. And so I hope this week that you all here in the European Earth observation commercialization community embrace ambition, because the world very much needs you to right now. If there's a part of the world with advanced Earth observation capabilities that believes both in the principles of open access to data and the importance of using public institutions to help us mitigate and prepare for climate change, at this point I have to say, Europe is now the top of the list for any honest observer. So the question that I want to leave you with today, to hopefully maybe spark ambition in your conversations this week, is this. What is the $1 to $10 billion scale vision for European climate leadership that can drive growth for European Earth observation commercial enterprises? I certainly have a few options myself. Obviously, the original vision of a climate change mission control needs a new champion. And having just visited the ESOC in Darmstadt yesterday, I know that ESA and Europe definitely have the capabilities to execute on that vision if it has the will to do so. But there are, of course, other visions that could also serve the purpose. A vision focused on a global constellation of methane and CO2 point source monitoring satellites for verification and monitoring of global emissions could also be an area where the world could greatly benefit from and value European space leadership. And while I have my preferred visions that I think could meet the moment, I think what matters more than any specific vision is having our conversation at that level of technological visions of what Earth observation can bring to the world at economic scales of investment worth fighting over, worth getting excited about, worth truly hoping for. So with that, I think my time for the moment has expired. I hope that our conversations here these next 2 days do not shrink from the task and the moment before us, because now more than ever, despite the many difficulties, the world, everyone here on Spaceship Earth, needs the ambition of the European space community. So, I wish you all viel Glück et vraiment courage as we all embrace and go together on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. We did get the reality check, but we also got a very clear call to action, ambition, and leadership. And this is also the perfect segue into the next panel, because we will stay focused, remain focused on the global, big picture. Climate change is a global problem, and we need global solutions and international cooperation. So to talk about all these things, we have a chair, a panel chair, Giuseppe Borghi, head of the PhilAb division at the European Space Agency. Giuseppe, I have to mention your special role is also the heart and mind behind the commercialization, behind the EU Commercialization Forum. So all these 2 days, the packed program, the great minds, the great speakers that are here today and tomorrow, and all the different formats are thanks to him and his team. So I think they deserve a special clap before we start the panel.
Okay, thank you. Now I get emotional. It will be very difficult. Okay, so this session we are starting now. I'm very happy to guide you. This is the first technical session, and the title is simply the Earth Observation Worldwide Market. Okay, so I will make a brief introduction. Then we will have 3 presentations from Nova Space, from ERSC, and in remote also from Aerospace, and which will introduce to us on the status and the trends of the market. And later on, we will have a panel with exquisite panelists from 6 industries, leader of this industry, from SME, from startups, from large system integrator. So just a few words to set the context and to reflect on what we heard up to now this morning. So we are talking about a market which is growing. We are lucky enough, we are dealing in a market which is growing. It is expected to double in revenue in the next 10 years, exceeding the 10 billion per year. That's what we'll hear. What we have heard from Rob of Serafini is that private investment are picking up. And this is a great signal, because if our people want to invest tens of billions in new space, means they see the opportunity to do business. And that's very important. We already recognize that USA has a leading role currently in commercialization of Earth observation. 45% of the market and the customer and the selling we have worldwide for value-added service are for North American customers. So the market is global, is not domestic market. China is picking up very, very fast, both in scientific, but also in the commercial sector, and is the second, let's say, competition we have to face. Europe is right now about 25-30% of the market share, depending which subsector you are looking for. Unfortunately, we are not growing very fast. We are not growing like the economy of Earth observation, means we are losing market share. And that's the challenge we have to face. But the content is positive. The content is there to do this and to win this competition. Just a few messages I collected from opening that I think will be important to keep in mind. ESA. Space commercialization is a priority for ESA since several years, and there are many tools right now that has been put in place to help industry and private investors to help our ecosystem. DigiClima, the need for climate action opportunity for players across Earth observation value chain. So climate change, climate transition is an opportunity for Europe, as also Alexander told us. Guillaume Delabrosse, DigiDefis, competitiveness, that's what we have to focus on. And European Commission has identified two challenges in which they are working. So limited access to grow funding, in particular later stage, Cassini initiatives, and access to public institution contract. So Copernicus contributing mission and other, but in general, I would talk about aggregation of public institutional demand, which is very important from our fragmented Europe, which is one of the limitations we have. EIB, tripartite collaboration agreement between EIB, ESA, and European Commission, exactly to support the access to private investment, to growth investment. Again, Seraphine Robb said, space once in a generation opportunity. Coming from a finance person, that's a big statement. What is saying is entrepreneurs should have a global ambition, a global strategy, not local. What we're interested is to hear entrepreneur with big ambition. What is also said is Europe, yes, we have many deals, but the deals are of a size which is smaller with respect to our competition in USA and China, which is a testimony of the difficulties to get access to private investment. DLR, for the commercialization to succeed, this needed to be sustained by a stable demand from European institutions. We know our market is mainly B2G, is mainly from public institutions. Us, as a public institution, has a key role on this, a very important role on this. And finally, from Alexander, the challenge for all of us in Europe. What's the 1 to 10 billion scale vision for a European climate leadership that can drive the growth and Earth observation in our industry? We are in a perfect position to be the leader on this. Is this our future for this industry, climate and green transition? Maybe. Okay? So I think these are some of the key messages that we should keep in mind. And after that, I will simply ask to Carla, Managing Director and Partner from Nova Space, to deliver the presentation and come here on stage with me.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you, Isa, and thank you all to be here today. So picking up on what has been discussed already this morning, so I'm here just to set the stage a little bit on the global trends and the key market data that can support future panels, as well as what has been discussed already. So maybe if the presentation is going up, that would be almost helpful. So we have seen several technological and also demand trends that are shaping the Earth observation industry of today and tomorrow. We have discussed about security and sustainability. So these are important drivers. We're actually driving not only the Earth observation data, but also the value-added service provisioning market. Constellation diversification, indeed, not only looking at optical, SAR, radar capabilities, but also hyperspectral, multispectral, etc., to complement the type of observation we can have to address our needs. Higher resolution deployment is become more and more a demand, but also actually a capability race, as we have seen between US, China, and Europe, a very leading edge capabilities there. And ultimately, unlocking the geo-awareness has been also introduced by our colleague at NASA. On the next slide, we see that the Earth observation satellites will triple in the next decade. Of course, fueling the industry in terms of budgets from the governmental side, but also commercial application side. But it's also important to understand that this is driven towards different types of constellation. And this is not shown on this slide, as mentioned before. So this is not only Europe, but it's also including US and China, that from another interesting report that I've seen across the board. So the capabilities of our Chinese colleagues are actually overperforming many of what we have here today in Europe. When we look at the commercial market on the next slide, actually it's not moving at all. So I'm just speaking, just noticing that the slides are not appealing. Okay, perfect. Back to here, sorry. So we are saying the trends we mentioned before. On the commercial market alone, so we see that the market is growing dramatically, and we forecast NOAA Space by 2032, a market of above 9 billion all over, driven by the downstream sector, including data and services. On the geographical distribution, so especially looking at the commercial parts, the market is overall 5 billion, is expected to grow, I said, 5% more or less on average in the next 10 years, and is mainly concentrated in North America and in America, as well as in Europe and Asia. But when we look at the details, the defense is definitely the largest market, with the US defense as a dominating customer. And this is actually looking at what Giuseppe mentioned before, so North America primary market, about 45% of revenues. There are big players like Maxar and Airbus taking the most of it. When we look at value-added service provision in market, is very fragmented, and especially in Europe is hinting towards the need to have higher integration and potentially trends coming forward. So if we look at, in a summary, as the key takeaways for the commercial session that is panel is coming afterwards, some key numbers to remember in this regard. Overall market commercial side is growing, and as we just mentioned, also with higher resolution and better refresh rates overall. Optical sensors are still dominating the technologies, but also with other important capabilities deployed to succeed and to satisfy the needs on defense, security, and sustainability, as mentioned earlier. In terms of type of customer, indeed, is government-led customer market with defense and security, and also civil government needs, as we mentioned. The VAS is fragmented, as we just said, and going forward, there will be a little bit of a battle between some more satellites and commercial capabilities, eventually have to demonstrate their business case and to succeed in the longer run. So what are we doing then next? To stimulate the future actually evolution, especially looking from the European perspective. Yes, it would be nice to have a bold ambition, big programs, and thanks to Copernicus, the European Commission investments, as well as ESA contribution, as we mentioned before, but then as an integrated demand and consolidated and federated demand going and flow down at national level, that will be also very much important. And with this, I'm just setting the scene, and we'll leave the rest of the floor to my colleague from ERSC to continue with the overview from the European industry perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Okay, so now I want to ask to Mr. Giovanni Silos Labini, Vice Chairman of ERSC, to join us and give us a presentation more focused on the downstream market.
I have not the assistance of the monitor there. Anyway. So, first of all, thank you very much. Thank you to Giuseppe and Isa to invite ERSC to present this. ERSC is the downstream industry European Association in EO. So we have, as already told, recently published our annual report, thanks also to ISA support. And this data have been already spoiled by Simonetta at the opening, but are very encouraging data. So I encourage you to download the full version of the report, give a lot of hints on what are the good and the bad of European policy in EO and in industry. One of the interesting numbers is that the total revenue from European downstream industry went up of about 27% between 22 and 23. In our understanding, there are two drivers back of this. The growing expense in defense and the Next Generation Europe program that fueled several EU constellation and downstream activities development around Europe. So this push on investment helps a big transformation also in the industry landscape in Europe. As I told, we have an increasing investment in the area of service for defense and security. As already said, there is a lot of push looking at the climate action and the Green Deal policy. We have some nice presentation on this, both from the Commission and ISA. There is a look like an acceleration of the integration in the Green Deal. This is another important aspect. I will be back on this in the end of the presentation. Go beyond a technology-neutral approach from the Commission vis-à-vis and the member state vis-à-vis Earth observation and climate change. To understand that space is a specific pillar for transformation needs specific action, specific demands, and specific anchor tenets. Well, there is also a lot of good news. We believe, for example, that the user number of Copernicus are growing. There is, as already told, a good push from the dynamic purchase system. We will be back on this later. And, okay, the benefits of Copernicus as well understood. What is important, and this is reported by the recent Draghi report, is that we are in the middle of a big transition of geopolitical equilibrium at global scale. As told before, Earth observation is a global business, so we must be aware of the warning from Mario Draghi in his this take from the level per speech, but this is even stronger reported between the Draghi report on space activity. And there is a growing competition at global scale on this. This happens in all space activity, but as told, happens specifically in Earth observation. There is a consistent shift from B2B to B2G and to business to defense, as we have seen also from the data presented before by Carla. In Europe, we have seen a growing industry market, but it is not all made by European industries. And there is a spending from US government for civil Earth observation that is between 600 and 800 million a year. and there is also a push from US defense market moving from buying data to buying analytics. This will be a strong support also to downstream industry in US. So on our side, which are the problems we have? We have a very fragmented demand offer scenario. Consider that in Europe, the SMEs generate about 60% of the overall turnover in space. Still missing a long-term anchor tenancy demand. We have, as I told before, this very good news about the spending from next generation program, but this is not yet a long-term commitment from the Commission, from ESA, and from member states on buying data and service from the European industry. Again, is a moment of transition, as I told, at the world scale, but also a local scale. We will have next year a new ministerial conference. There is a revision of the multi-year financial plan of the Commission, and there is still a long time from a new idea input and their implementation. And then we have also the fact that these investments that fueled the growth in the 23, 24, and then 25 will stop in 2026. And then, just to be perfect, we have a strong pressure on member states' budget. So we, as ERSC, we believe that we must all together try to adapt to this turbulent era of change. So push for a more strategic coordination, and so have some coherent policies between the agency, the national agency, the member states, and the Commission. Have a long-term investment in Earth observation that have been demonstrated that will push for more private investment in space. A push for technological innovation. We had from the visionary presentation from Seraphim Space this today, next, and tomorrow scenarios. And I have to say that a lot of the proposal I heard around, also the evolution in the we expect for the next ministerial conference of program like Incubed and the growing of the dynamic purchase system are very good news. And push on public-private partnership. And again, this will help to attract new capital and the long-term investment. And last but not least, a lot of investment in workforce generation, because if we want to sustain this growth in the long term, we need effort and new culture in addressing the growth of a prepared workforce for the future. Just to close, again, we are moving toward a very competitive scenario at world scale. If we want that our Earth observation industry remain in this leadership position on worldwide scale, we must change approach. We must understand that if we are not at the table, maybe we will be on the menu of this competition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanni. Very good. So now we should have, with a remote connection, Mr. Pierre Lyonnais, Research and Managing Director from ASD Aerospace.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me. I apologize. I was not able to be there physically because I have another engagement in the afternoon today in Paris. But I am very pleased to share with you some data-driven information on what is the current situation of the European space infrastructure. So the two previous speakers gave very interesting views on what is the data market. And what I want to share with you is some insights on what is the business of actually building the infrastructure, so the satellites and the launch service associated to actually producing this data. And one of the interesting points as well that we would like to recall is that while the data market is evolving, it only represents a small fraction of the actual usage of the data, because we realize that, and you will see that from the data set I will share with you, that the majority of the infrastructure is actually owned by the users themselves, and is not actually producing data which is eventually going on the market. It is either produced and released for free, like for the Copernicus system, or it is tactical and military-driven data architecture, which is controlled by the military users and not released into a market-driven approach. So just some context here. Here you see the total mass launched in space since 1957. We very much like showing those figures. And you see that Earth observation has been the main driver for space applications in the first few decades of the space age. Now it has been superseded by broadband, but it still remains an important share of the actual space infrastructure which is deployed every year. On a side note, all those Earth observation satellites that were deployed in the very first decades of space are still in space with us today and are one of the major causes of debris pollution that we have in space. If we move to the specific view of only the Earth observation infrastructure, looking from the customer perspective, the other important notion that we know today is that most of the Earth observation satellites which have been deployed in the past, and still today, most of the Earth observation satellites which have been launched are for military institutional customers first. The civil institutional customers are representing a much lower business opportunity for the people which are building and launching satellites, and the commercial business that you can see taking up a little bit in recent years still represents a small but growing fraction of the demand for Earth observation satellites, as has been stated also by Giuseppe in his opening statement. So we are very much aligned here. Here we see another view. The previous one was showing the satellites in mass. Here we show what is the actual market opportunity in $1 million, or actually a few $billion in the end, by different market segments, because it's interesting when you're building those satellites and launching them to see what kind of business opportunities is available to you. And here we see that clearly the military institutional business is actually the biggest one. This is the one that you can see in those dark red histograms. It's about $15 billion a year in terms of a business opportunity, but most of that business opportunity being located in the USA and in China. Clearly, this is not necessarily a big business for European companies building satellites. You see that the launch market associated to that is in the order of $3 billion. And when we look at the situation with the civil institutional market, it is much smaller. In average, it represented about $5 billion in 2024 from our estimates, and associated to a launch market, which is much smaller. And the commercial opportunity, as you can see, very small on the right-hand side here. Again, it is growing in recent years, but it remains a very small business opportunity so far for the people who are actually building and launching the satellites. So again, a context where most of the demand for Earth observation systems worldwide is actually driven by military application. This is another type of statistics that we produce at Eurospace. This is derived from the Eurospace Facts and Figures survey, and it measures the revenues generated within the European space industry by the provision of Earth observation satellites with 3 different market segments. You see in blue or greenish the ESA demand for those Earth observation satellites, which includes the business delegated by the European Union and the one from EUMETSAT. So it is very much the European-driven institutional program that represented in 2023 about 900 million in revenue for the European space industry, which makes it one of the main market segment for European spacecraft industry. Then you have the second segment, which is the other institutional Europe, which includes mostly national-driven programs, and that represented about 500 million of revenues for the industry. And then we have the opportunities given by commercial and expert businesses, which are a sizable, rather stable business segment, but not a major one, in the order of 330 million euro in 2023. Then I share with you another view, again, on quantitative elements, and we look at specifically the institutional market, and we spread it between the civil Earth observation infrastructure, launch not included, and the military Earth observation infrastructure. And here we see from the demand perspective where most of the demand is coming from. And you see that Europe in light green, I use this color so that we can see that well, because the histograms for Europe are quite small, represents a very small fraction of the demand overall, really very much expressed mostly on the civilian part. And we see that clearly here, the military Earth observation infrastructure, that you can see on the chart on the right, especially with the demand from US customers and also growingly from Chinese customers in blue at the bottom of the slide. Clearly, this is where most of the development is happening for space Earth observation infrastructure. Again, Europe has been a leading power in terms of demand for those observation systems, thanks also to the big efforts done by ESA science programs in Earth observation, but also, of course, the European Union programs, GMES, then renamed Copernicus. Here we look at specifically the commercial Earth observation infrastructure, so the smaller part of those market segments which I've been mentioning so far. And here you see the demand perspective, again, organized in regions. And you see that from the point of view of the demand, most of the acquisition power for Earth observation systems in the commercial domain is coming from the USA, with almost $800 million available from the demand perspective. You see that the European demand for those systems in red on this chart is still rather small, but it is a sizable element which shows interest for the European supply chain. When we move indeed from the perspective of the supply, again, this is the same market, but just seeing from the supply side, we see that clearly we have a very strong relationship between the origin of the supply and the origin of the demand, which we have summarized in the next slide, where you can see that basically every market segment is organized regionally, even in the commercial domain. And this is also driven by the fact that a lot of those commercial Earth observation systems are very much verticalized supply chains, where actually the operator is procuring or sometimes even building its own satellites. So this is a very critical situation when we see that all those markets are regionally organized, which tells us that in the commercial Earth observation domain, the potential for experts remains quite limited. Here I have listed in this slide all the major commercial players. So who is actually buying those commercial Earth observation infrastructure systems? And we see that the demand is very much concentrated, because the top 5 players represent 57% of the total capex, and with only 40 players in the list, we reach 95% of the total capex. This represents an invest in commercial EO infrastructure, an investment of about 8.7 billion, according to our estimate, in the past 15 years. And this includes also the launch services required. So you can see that the big players here, but I have a better chart to show them to you, are actually MDA, so formerly Maxar Digital Globe. So this is the #1 customer for commercial Earth observation systems so far, and it is also one which has been very much associated to generating and capturing most of the demand. Then we see that some new space players are emerging, like Planet here, or 21AT, which is a Asian company. We see Capella Space, ICE-I. So you see all the well-known names in commercial observation, including in the new space. Of course, Airbus is also playing a major role here with the Pléiades architecture. Now we move to some information on the equity raised by new space startups since 2000. Again, this is another metric that we established at Eurospace. And here you see that unsettlingly, remote sensing remains a very small area of investment for the new space sector. And we see that investors are mostly still driven by transportation systems and communication systems rather than they are on remote sensing. Again, this chart only includes upstream and the midstream, so we have not factored in the funds raised by data analysis company in the downstream. And then I want to come up with one final slide, so I stay within the allocated time and I don't push us much later. But here we see the situation with the Earth observation infrastructure startups up to 2024. So on the left, you see the global situation. We have three indicators on this chart. The number of companies created in light green. We have the employment in those companies at the date of today in brown histograms, and then we have the total funds raised. So you see that overall the situation is of about 5 to 7 new companies created worldwide, new companies created for Earth observation infrastructure in the new space sector. And we see that Europe represents a sizable fraction of that, because Europe represents about between a quarter and a third of the global Earth observation infrastructure in the new space domain. So I tried to share with you a number of data sets. I believe that the slides will be available for all participants afterwards. So this is the landscape as we see it today. Again, a data landscape which is very much driven by military infrastructure deployment. Also, civil infrastructure deployment plays a major role, and the commercial dimension, it is growing in recent years, but it's still very much a secondary business opportunity. Europe is playing a good role in all this, thanks to the good investment of the European civil institutions and the European civil institutional programs, and it is also taking its share on the commercial side. Thank you very much. I am finished at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Dionnet. I'm not sure if you can see the audience, but I can tell you that you have grabbed a lot of attention. There was an audience very silent and listening what you were telling us. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you. Okay, so you see our partners are reshaping a bit the stage for the panel we will have now. So 1 minute for this. As I said, we will have 3 representatives of the largest system integrator we have in Europe, so OHB, Thales Alenia Space, and Airbus, and 3 from new space, small, medium enterprises, so Satlantis, Open Cosmos, and Aerospace Lab. Thank you very much. So I would like to start to call Benoît Deper, CEO and founder of Aerospace Lab. Please, if you can join me on stage, the first. Second, Juan Thomas Hernani, founder and CEO of Satlantis. In not any order, but the order we have here. And Raphaël Sisquier, founder and CEO of Open Cosmos, please. Sébastien Taillade, Domain Manager Earth Observation for OHB. Eric Even, Space Digital, Head of Space Digital in Airbus. Last but not least, Sergio Greco, Thales Alenia Space, Senior Vice President Operation, Business Line, Observation, Exploration, and Navigation. So we have a big challenge. We are between the panel and the lunch break, so we will try to be in time. So I would kindly ask each one of you to introduce yourself, maybe give an introductory statement of a few minutes, and then we can start with a round of questions. So Benoit, if you like to start.
All right, thank you, Giuseppe. I'm Benoit Deper, CEO and founder of Aerospace Lab. Company is 6 years old. We are building satellites. We have a few in space, ranging from multispectral imaging to high-res optical to signal intelligence, remote sensing, RF spectrum monitoring satellites. I happen to say SIGINT, but I'm not allowed to say SIGINT, so it's not SIGINT, it's RF sensing. We are vertically integrated, 400 people in the company. And before that, I was a YGT at ESA, and before that I was at NASA Ames under Pete Wardens, and Will Marshall was my boss there, so yeah.
Thank you. My name is Juan Hernani. I am the CEO of Satlantis. Satlantis is actually one of the 3 companies that has been selected in Europe by the Center of Strategic International Studies from Georgetown that look at the global Earth observation in the planet, and there were only Airbus, ICEYE, and Satlantis selected as leading some of those segments. We are a very focused and specialized company into cameras and Earth observation technology for small satellites, from the visible and cameras that look like a Coca-Cola to the thermal infrared with cameras that look like a small Hubble telescope. So covering the whole range, these are 11 years of specialization have driven us to the point that we are today 150 people, 25 million turnover, and 30 million cash.
Hello, my name is Rafael Jordà-Siquier. I am the CEO and founder of OpenCosmos. At OpenCosmos, what we do is we design, we manufacture and operate satellites full end-to-end. This has been a phenomenal year for us, actually. We have experienced, I think, quite a high growth. We have closed with the contract signature that we had earlier today with Simonetta, a total of 120 million in contracts. The team has grown now in 4 geographies. We're in the UK, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. And I'm really excited about the potential that the satellite infrastructure that we are bringing up there it's going to enable. We have launched 10 satellites to date. We have 32 under delivery that go from some of them symmetric, hyperspectral, multispectral, a wide range of capabilities being brought into orbit.
Good morning, Sebastian Taviat from OHB. OHB, I think, is known by most of you. So we are one of the 3 big large system integrators, the 2 others sitting behind me. Yeah? And so I'm responsible for the Earth observation domain. It means, in fact, all the development and growth of OHB related to Earth observation in the 3 business units we have. So the most known one, obviously, is space, where we are manufacturing space systems. The second one being aerospace, where we have more the launchers activities. And the third one being digital. Digital is covering principally 3 areas: the midstream, so everything on the ground, and the midstream, the security aspects on the ground, and the analytics and for geospatial. So happy to be here and with this good panel, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I take over. I am Eric Even. I am heading Airbus Space Digital within Airbus. It's a new name. It's a fusion of all the activities related to all the ground equipment and services in connectivity, SATCOM if you prefer, and Earth observation. It is one of the answers to the market to say that the boundaries between telecom and geospatial are becoming less and less clear. That is why we put all of that under one roof that I have the pleasure to lead. For Airbus, tremendous year as well. And here today, especially with the launch of our Pléiades Neo Next program, which is the enhancement of the existing constellation of 2 satellites. Some of you should remember we lost 2 at the launch end of 22, and it's the answer also to continue and to keep the commitment to space and to our continuous investment as we saw earlier. Thank you.
Good morning all, my name is Sergio Greco. I am a Senior Vice President for Thales Alenia Space. Thales Alenia Space have in Earth observation a real core, a kernel of activities. We are a company of 2.3 billion last year revenues, of which 40% are for Earth observation and exploration. We are lucky because we started our activity since 40 years ago with MTG, and we launched 2 years ago the first MTG imager. So people, when looks in the television, which on so how is the climate and the weather, use our satellite. We are leading Copernicus. Mostly we are responsible for the 3 missions, and we are responsible for the 2 main payload for the mission CO2M and Crystal. For CO2M, we are deploying the most important payload for CO2. I've seen before for our colleague how much important is this, and we are launching as well a little constellation for the compact gas imager to give locally the solution to the pollution in our air. We invest because we have launched our new product, which is only one product, which is a constellation of revising satellite, optical, and SAR. That, by the way, we won a contract with Indonesia in order to make something in terms of export. And we are lucky because next month, in next 3 days, we will launch Sentinel-1C for ESA from Kourou. And on the very near to Christmas, 22, 21 of December, we are launching the second satellite that we are producing for the Korean authorities for the K425 for Earth observation. Thank you to ESA to have invited us to this nice, fantastic organization. It is a pleasure because we were here 20 years ago to sign the Galileo contract, 1.8 billion of contract. I come in Frankfurt after 20 years. So this could be something very positive for the future.
You are highlighting the color of our hairs. That's not fair.
This is why we are, okay, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good. So let's start with a question. And I think one of the most difficult questions for Benoit. So we were discussing before, so Benoit revenue is very well spread globally. There's also, let's say, a location in USA. So geopolitical context is changing. So we have to see what's happening after the election in USA, the role of Elon Musk, which is already a key player in our industry now, is also having a political role, what we understand. In Europe, import duties are going up toward China for automotive. Import duties are going up between USA and the other one. Geopolitical situation is getting every day more complicated. So can you help us to reflect a bit what should do a company like yours to still win the global competition? Because what we have discussed before, we need to have global ambition. So how can we be successful in this difficult situation?
I mean, thank you for the question. It's like the softball. Yeah, I mean, what do we know? We are a 6 years old company. There's only 400 people, and but from what we see is that China is quite effective in what they are doing because they, at the expense maybe of some freedoms and some democracy, but they can unroll strategic plans that are like decades planning ahead, like 50 years plus. And it's quite efficient, which you see their growth in all the domains. As you said, from a technical standpoint, they are dominating the EV industry now. And I've seen like, in the newspaper 2 days ago that the European Commission was asking for tech transfer of Chinese factories in Europe now. That it's the other way around. We don't do tech transfer to them. They do tech transfer to us. When you look at the US, it was a bit convoluted, and we've seen the presentation before, to get some mission going forward in an efficient way due to governance and the complexity that goes with it. And my time at NISA, I experienced that firsthand on the other side of the barrier. And my view is that it's not a judgment on whether it's good or not, but that I believe that the next administration is going to remove a lot of bureaucracy, I would call it that way. And I would not be surprised if it was at the expense of some freedoms and democracy ultimately to go with a model that looks like the Chinese one. And so I would expect some Chinese level of efficiency coming back in the US. And the big question is like, what is Europe going to do with this? Are we going to be like alone with values and virtues, but broken and dependent on the two superpowers? I'm feeling pretty sad, and I would say that the likely path is probably that one, that we will lose and every day more and more sovereignty at the expense of those two guys. What we should do, I don't know, because we have a lot of smart people everywhere. Commission, ISA, industry, we have money, we have talent. It's just that too many cooks in the kitchen, no clear way forward, too much bureaucracy, but we all know this. But the question has been 10 years I'm doing panels, and I see this situation going down and down and down. At some point, I'm expecting a big crisis, like some kind of wake-up call. Ukraine was starting to do that. Trump election is another one, but doesn't seem to be enough. So what do we need? Yeah.
Yes, probably you're right. We need a bit of cultural shock in Europe. I hope it's not a crisis, but business as usual is not going to help us. Juan Thomas, so as you mentioned before, Satlantis was recognized by CISIS as, I think, the best SWIR technology worldwide. So this is a study that has been done in USA before by NGA and now repeated. Was 2021, the first one, which we were giving medals to top performance instruments in multispectral, SAR, and so on. And 2021, there was a situation quite well balanced between USA, Europe, and China. Then it's been repeated this year, I think. And as Juan Thomas said, Europe has only 3. So we lost a lot of these medals to the benefit of USA and China. So also the technological, let's say, leadership in the commercial market is challenging. Okay, but Satlantis is one of the good ones. So that's a very nice recognition of our technology. But this is for sure an interesting ingredient to win competition worldwide. But what else is needed? What do you think is the other elements of a recipe to be successful in a global ambition?
Thank you, Giuseppe. I think we are one of the few companies that has gone east because we were born in the US in 2013 and came to Spain to set up our headquarters in 2014. No? I think it's a balance of finance, technology, and market. We have to have this combination to provide the success. And I think we really require a strong focus and specialization to win. Because if we become too generalistic, we are just small sats. You do, like many others, you have one champion per country in Europe. That is not a champion, no? That is a regional league. So I think we have to focus into those 200 million that were highlighted before, and that was, by the way, called export and commercial. So maybe we can account for 10% of that amount. No? So looking at really at international markets as the way to win. And really you have to balance these 3 elements to say how much the market is ready to pay and what are the actual mechanisms to connect to the user and the customer needs. No? And in this case, SWIR means methane. So it's methane detection. And it is a strong evolution. So it is not a big satellite of hundreds of millions, no? That I would say, if you have hundreds of millions, maybe anyone can do that, no? The point is, how can you do that with a Copernicus contributing mission of 5 million, no? That is our case. And so it is a set of technologies that continue to evolve very quickly. So it started by a SWIR, but now we have a GSTP that is now in a flight model that is putting the cryogenic SWIR, which means that we will look at methane in the next window, and we have a TIR camera under another incubed program that you run that will provide another peak for the methane, and we have one incubed program that will provide polarimetry for aerosols. So it it is a focused technology perspective to be winners in methane detection.
Thank you, Juan Thomas. Rafael, also your company, as you said, was quite successful in order booking, but I know you were being also quite successful in capturing a private investment in the last years. So can you tell us a bit how a private investor is instrumental again in a go-to-market strategy which is global? So how these tools, because at the end is a tool, in addition to money, because that's what is helping you to win the global competition?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that leveraging a private capital to be able to deliver fast and to the international market has been one of the key elements of our success. There is money out there, a lot of it, actually. And actually, Rob showed the numbers earlier this morning from Seraphine on the amount of investment that is happening at a global scale. And it's clear that the money is there. Probably also another reason why these, although I think it was ranked 4 or 5 in the slides that Simonetta showed about the worries of the companies and startups and growing entities, this was number 4. The first one, and this is the elephant in the room, actually, it's market adoption and use of these data and these capabilities, right? The way I see it is the investments that are happening in Europe, the money is there, but it's happening at another pace and at another scale and with another kind of risk profile. I'll give you one example. OpenCosmos raised 50 million last year. We had nearly bootstrapped until there, just raising a very, very little seed 7 years from now. And the journey to get there was tough. We had to have like EBITDA positive results, 2x year on year, to actually be able to capture the appetite of European investors. All of our investors at the moment are European. And that's something that is a big barrier, I think, for many of the companies with high potential actually to be able to surpass. You really need to be performing outstanding in terms of financial results, delivery, success rate of satellites to orbit. Nothing, I mean, touching wood, nothing has failed from any of the missions that we have launched today. So you need to build an immaculate track record, a lot of financial resilience and good metrics in order to be able to attract the kind of investment risk profile that there is in Europe. There is one thing that I think would change that more than anything else that we can talk about here, and it's the involvement of pension funds in backing venture capitals in Europe. That's something that does not happen. Actually, I think there are some regulation in some countries and regions that actually, to some extent, prohibit that or make it harder. In the US, all of the big funds that are investing big numbers, they all have contributions from big pension funds that back it very strongly, right? So maybe that's one element. If we want to stimulate the private investment into the sector, to look at. Maybe the problem is not what the space sector is doing, is how can we help actually the financial mechanisms in the private sector to really lean in. The last mention that I would like to do is that it's not useful to have funding available if you don't have those product market fit ready to scale kind of companies. And I repeat it, this is the elephant in the room. We are starting to serve a lot of data to a lot of analytical partners, some of them with exceptional technologies that in some of those other markets we are starting to see them flourish. But I wonder what is needed to see analytical and service companies on the downstream side to have recurrent revenues above 10 million a year. That's when they can hit the truly scaling up funding that I think could be available also here in Europe, right? That's where I would put the focus in solving the problem.
Thank you, Rafael. So exactly continuing this line for Sebastian. So European is suffering by our fragmentation, political fragmentation, regional fragmentation, which is making, I think, difficult for us to collect the demand, to have an aggregated demand. So should Europe try to find, let's say, a common regulation that is putting together the European level and also the national level in order to have, let's say, a visibility and have, let's say, a demand which is stable for industry, and that put Earth observation as a preferred tool, like is happening in USA. In USA, there are regulations which are indicating Earth observation asset should be the preferred tool to serve this regulation. Is something that a company like OHP would see possible, welcome? What's your view?
So yeah, I think we have seen some figures, and we are discussing also today about investment and money coming in Europe and being used to develop the EU market in Europe. And what is obvious we see is through, so there is no clear way for moving forward. So this is very fragmented, and the problem is, it's a bit for me a chicken and egg problem. So because on one side, to develop a market, we need to have already the mandatory data which is available to allow for growth. So we have in Europe a fantastic tool which is Copernicus, so which already provides a lot of data, and we have seen a big growth of the downstream area over the past 20 years. But we see that it's not enough compared to the other, we mentioned several times the US and China on the other side. We can also mention Asia more generally. Yeah? And so I think there is a need now for more systematically providing data, information with the specificities that are required, usually better spatial resolution, better time resolution, better spectral resolution for some areas, yeah? Complementing Copernicus. And Copernicus is needed. It is the key, the backbone of the whole system, but then generating this data in a more generic manner will allow to develop a market on the other side. And here, so this is exactly also, I think, what is missing to prepare these regulations. Because for regulations, I think the politics need to really understand what is available to then define the regulation that we can really measure. So if there is no measurement and certification of what we are looking at, we cannot really believe in a regulation that we don't know if it can be followed. Yeah? So for me, it is the one of the main points. So to invest at the beginning in some infrastructure that will allow to generate and to support these regulations that will then sustain the growth of the market on the other side. And this, I believe strongly. So if there is a market that has then developed, yeah, and also we have developed industry solutions that can offer, or let's say, allow for these regulations and on a sustainable way, I believe then we can, after the first investment I mentioned before, have a commercial space that is sustainable per itself, because then we will have to extend, deploy the systems that we have developed together. Yeah? And this deployment is an area where investment will be easier to find, because the problem is developing the big thing that I've mentioned before are, let's say, you need a break-even time which is roughly between 8 years if it is really if it's working very well, which is today to find some investment for this a big issue. Yeah? So, and if you have to rebuild the system or to deploy a system, then of course the timelines are much shorter. So to find the investments for this, the private investments, will be much easier. Yeah? So, and then we come to this sustainable loop that I imagine. So.
Thank you, Sebastian. Eric, similar question about demand aggregation, demand. So my thought is that, let's say, China and USA, they have a continental demand. They have a single point of decision. That's not what is Europe. How do you see this? Do you see a role for demand aggregation in Europe or not? And if yes, how would you suggest or require to public institutions to do that?
Good question. Thanks, Giovanni. So first of all, the clear answer is yes, we see a demand. If we would not see a demand, we would not have invested as Airbus to date more than 600 million in our own constellation. And on top of that, recommitting to further investment with Pléiades Neonext. So yes, there is a demand. Echoing what you just said, if compared to the US, we are not at the right scale. Why do I say that? If you take the main competitor in the US, they invested a similar amount of money than Airbus. But they have a frame contract of 300 million euros a year, ahead of launch. 300 million a year frame contract ahead of launch, and a 10 years visibility. My CFO dreams about that. Do we have something similar in Europe? No. We have the Copernicus contribution mission. Great, very good. Is it at the right scale? No. That is why we urge, and I urge also, that Copernicus contribution mission gets much, much bigger, that it paves the way for the EOGS program, which is also to be driven by the service. Sorry, I hate that, but copying what the US have successfully done. So yes, there is a demand, but we need to get our act together to pull this demand and to push it up to sustain a full ecosystem that you see here on the panel.
Thank you, Eric. Sergio, another difficult question. So, in addition to have this global competition, we have also capability coming from USA and from China. And there are action happening. For example, in USA, they are rediscussing ITAR regulation, ER regulation, to liberate technology, to have the possibility to bring their top technology and serve European demands. So, which is making it a bit even more complicated, because we have now a potential supplier from USA coming to serve needs we have in Europe. So how can we deal with that? What is the idea, if there is an idea?
If there is an idea. I mean, as said by my friend, to compete against USA and China is not a simple case. It's clear that I prefer to give some steps in the past, because to solve this kind of problem, we had today several points. I like very much the point that said by Dusan, saying there is a lack in standard, no? So we have no standard clarified in terms of quality of data, quality of product. There are several activities, but not a standard. I remember that when we made Galileo 20 years ago, we were going to make a fantastic stratospheric system, but it was not appealing. No one was put the money, several discussions, national, non-national, organization, and so on. The only way that when there were the sponsors in Europe, the Bangeman, there was the Loyola de Palacio, the old commissioner, they said, make this system, we must make. At that moment, you said, switch off the selective availability for GPS. So they give freedom, the signal to Europe. At the time, there was a moment that we should follow or we should make our own system. Our policy maker said, we do our system, and we made. Today, we are in the same loop. Why? We are increasing, we have the product, we have a good company, we have a good satellite, good downstream, ground segment, ground user. So they say, okay, we give freedom to our product to be sold externally. So it's only, 20 years later, there is the same movement. So how has to react Europe? As we made 20 years ago. So considering that the solution of a problem is an holistic approach, you cannot solve here and there, it's not a puzzle. There is a question of regulation, there is a question of lack of standard. Regulation, okay, ITAR, AR, yes. But for me, it goes probably in a sort of an attitude, an ethical attitude of Europe. People which work in Europe, best value for money. So because we are using taxpayer, European taxpayer, so we must make best value for money. But best value for money means we have to consider if when we give a contract to outside Europe, if we are deteriorating the technological gap that we have in Europe, if we are touching jobs in Europe, if we are touching the sovereignty of Europe. So this is something that we should take into account. It's time, as they do in the States, we must give preference. Is a very nice word that says everything. And preference, I don't know what it means, but preference is, I don't say Europe first, but not Europe second. Second point, technological development. I appreciate what you said about the investment, because we are investing, Only to make an example, we are investing through the PNRR and with a larger investment of TAS, a new facility in Italy, in Rome, by the way. that I invite you, all of you, after May 2025 to visit, because we are making there the infrastructure for the integration of all the constellation in Europe. And then there we have what we call a joint lab, where all the company that want to make an exercise, want to make a study, they want to make an activity in terms of assembly integration and test, you know, a facility as a service. I will be then with my colleague, our key country executive, Sherzad Rajer, to give some detail about this point. But technological development means that there should be the continuity in the contract. If I must make a competition with someone, and we said that, the GDP in Europe is 50% outside. The GDP in USA, 25% outside. In China, 37%. It means that we are 1/6 with money coming to others. Having said this, if I make a competition in the external world, I have two problems. First, I must allocate the risk. In some countries, there are risks. There is not a risk funding in Europe that protect the big LSI to be the first. Imagine that when I say, I said at the beginning, as a task, we have 2-3 billion of revenues, 60% is for the filiere, it's not for us, it's externally. In Italy, we are giving more than, we have triplicated the work for the Italian filiere than in the past. So we are working, and if we get a program as a prime, we deliver to the others 60% of that contract. So having said this, how can I compete if I have not a future? I cannot spread my non-recurring in a long term. How can I compete? In a bid, we have 35% of the cost of a bid is manpower. How we can compete with someone which has a cost of a labor 1/6 with respect to Europe? So we need that Europe, you say, lose this fragmentation, make a compound, and then there is two other aspects, collaboration among industries. In the external world, we compete, but we face only one China, one USA. We don't ever see too many other companies. So every time we compete, someone wins, someone loses. But why we have to lose in Europe? Is Europe able to support that someone lose today? And then we need a shock. The shock is that I remember the view that has been presented by Guillermo Labros from the Commission. On the right part, there was Galileo, there was Copernico, and then it was said, and soon, Iris Square, soon. Soon means, no? Soon. Now, why we need to have the next generation of Earth observation, European Earth observation, on top of the various national activity? Because we have to pass the work. We are not discussing Earth observation only for climate. Earth observation is information. And if you have the right information in the right time, you will not be second. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. We have a few minutes to the lunch break, so I want to give you one dreaming minutes, which is you should say and ask what you really would like to get from public institution the next 5 years. Benoit, start to laugh. I think you all mentioned it a bit, but be direct and be transparent. What you really would like to see from ESA, from European Commission, from member states happening to make us successful? Us, eh?
I mean, it's wishful thinking, but efficiency. And I know it's not easy because, again, I know there is a lot of smart people working at ESA and the Commission trying to solve this for a few years, if not more now. And the stuff is really complex. Member states have divergence in end goals and protecting their national industry. And it's complex, but one of my dreams would be like efficiency and to be able to unlock the talent pool and the capital that is in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. And Thomas?
I think acknowledgement to reality to start with, no? So that I think we need to know what is happening to the European market, what is happening to the European offer, and acknowledge that into the policies of next steps, no? I think here we have a line that could represent perhaps a swing, because I think we greet you to invite new space with the incumbent industry. There is no conflict. There is, I think, collaboration. I think we witness very many projects in collaboration, but we have very different dynamics, no? I think we have to acknowledge employment, creation of employment, competition, and perhaps connect to real opportunities where, as my colleague from Airbus was mentioning, that there is a 300 million contract from public services every year. But of course, the US is not paying the construction of the satellites. This is on the account of the suppliers, no? Yep. So I think shifting into what you are doing in your day-to-day business, no? Models that connect other sectors of the economy towards the space demand. I think this is what we should do.
What we need. Thank you. Rafael?
It's a super long list.
No, just one.
So I'm going to try to make it very sharp and sweet. We need a strategic thinking in Europe. And we need to, what does this mean? When you have the challenge of global competition as the way that it's materializing, you look where you have your strengths. Right now, Europe does not have its strength in launch, does not have its strength in telecom. It still has an edge in EU. You have the best technology developments done over here, hands down, best talent. Don't lose that. Focus on where you have that strategic edge. Focus. Second, leadership. If you have a strategic advantage, but you don't have the leadership to back it, to push it forward, then it can be something that never materializes it. And that leadership, what does it require? It requires to take strong actions for effectiveness. ESA is showing that leadership. We are seeing it. In the last 3-4 years, the programs like IMCube have generated some of those capabilities. Scout is also bringing new capabilities into orbit. And now, with the aggregation of capabilities from different countries and the procurements happening very fast, this is also happening. We need clear leadership to take strong decisions to make it very effective. And the rest is for all of us as an industry to really work really hard. We are competing against the best in the world. If we want actually to succeed, it's not enough to just put satellites up there. We need to bring the services, make them more competitive, and think about exporting all of that. So it's a collective work that we need to be doing over here, not just looking at what the institutions or the country or the member state should be doing. It's all of us.
Thank you, Rafael. Sebastián, 1 minute.
So yeah, I can only agree with what they have said. So in fact, what I have is a bit more concrete, a bit combining what they have said, in fact. So it's really putting money on table to develop, let's say, constellations that will contribute to expanding Copernicus or Copernicus principally, that will allow also to develop the market on the ground, and also to deploy further with commercial, with private money, an auto finance system, ecosystem for commercial space, and this at the end will also allow to have a guaranteed workload more constant to the whole supply chain in Europe. That will then make also this whole supply chain more competitive on the market.
On the rest.
So,
yeah, thank you. Eric.
Thanks. Giuseppe is Christmas very soon, so I have 2 wishes.
Good. Okay, we allow.
First one, revamp and drastically increase the budget of Copernicus contribution missions. It's a great
tool.
It's a great tool. It works very well. Let's build on that. Number 1. Number 2, put on the street and launch the program of EOGS. Yes, but make it service-driven. Yes, we need to own some infrastructure in space, but not all. Again, copy what is working well elsewhere and make it service-driven. As industry, I don't like the difference between old space and new space, but let's take the startup and the established ones. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone. We stand ready for that challenge.
Thank you, Eric. Sergio?
Okay, I take the last sentence as thus as we are an old new space company. Because we cover from big elephant 5 tons satellite to 200 kilogram satellite. So we are top and down. So we do not share. I think that even this point to create this dichotomy between LSI, non-LSI, PMI, SME is creating a mess. I really think that if there is not a big program that can be agreed, organized by Prime, there will be fragmentation on them. Only to, I have 30 seconds. For me, the space is a good filière, still weak. Is a question and ground for expert. To make satellite is not stupid things. You cannot do, with geography. You must do. So I think that the seniority of the people, the responsibility for me in this moment goes and asks ISA to act as we have done in the past to recreate the momentum because we need the expert. I mean, we cannot go on with these, stratospheric words, fantastic geography, tons of colors. We need action. There is the need today. So I think that for me, for example, in the next ministerial, the idea to have this hybrid constellation, which can make, a sort of compound among the various national elements in terms of even standardization. How, a Portuguese constellation can speak with the Greek constellation, with the Italian, with the French, how to share the intercompatibility, the intercalibration, the data quality, the standard. This is something that can create a momentum.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And I want again to thank our panelists. It was, I think, a great discussion. And I give back to Joanna for concluding the morning and to introduce to the lunch break. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we are indeed ready for the lunch break. We will be back in the afternoon with more panels. The program is packed. Once you have eaten, I will give you all the details about the afternoon and the evening program because there's a lot going on because we want to make the most of your time and the networking opportunities. For now, I would just say, Giuseppe, we can extend the lunch break already. We are 30 minutes delayed, so yeah, let's say we add 30 minutes to the original planning in the official program. Enjoy lunch and see you back.